welcome to I-24 News Defense, your weekly review of strategic affairs, security, intelligence, and more, brought to you in cooperation with Israel Defense Magazine. Tonight, we discuss recent tension which erupted after the discovery of the bodies of the 3 kidnapped Israeli teenagers. And we also go back 38 years to one of the most legendary operations in modern military history. But before all that, let's take a look at what else is happening in the world.
We begin in Egypt, where 2 senior Egyptian police officers were killed defusing homemade bombs near the presidential palace in Cairo. The attack fell on the first anniversary of the mass protests that led to the ouster of then-President Mohamed Morsi. All the devices were planted less than 20 meters from the walls of the Itiadia Palace in eastern Cairo's upscale Heliopolis district. Attacks by militants have killed almost 500 police and soldiers since Morsi's overthrow and incarceration. Moving to North Korea, which confirms 3 missile tests in recent weeks, ahead of a visit by Chinese President Xi Jinping to Seoul. The rockets were fired in a northwesterly direction from a site near the eastern city of Wonsan, with leader Kim Jong-un watching. South Korea claims that the tests were of short-range Scud missiles with a range of about 500 kilometers.
After an extensive 18-day search operation in the West Bank, the bodies of 3 Israeli teenagers who were kidnapped and murdered were found north of Hebron. Before we discuss the possible implications of this affair, let's recap the IDF's Operation Brothers Keeper to find the youth.
Terrorists carried out Thursday's kidnapping of 3 Israeli teenagers.
Naftali, Eyal, Gilad, we love you, we miss you. Please be strong.
من مصلحتنا أن يكون بيننا وبين الإسرائيليين تنسيق أمني حتى نحمي أنفسنا، حتى نحمي شعبنا.
I believe much more can be done and should be done by so many. I wish to ask, doesn't every child have the right to come home safely from school?
Rest in peace, my child. We will learn to sing without you. We will always hear your voice within us.
Joining us now is a Reserve Brigadier General Nitzan Uriel, a former head of the Israeli Counterterrorism Bureau. Good evening.
Good evening.
So far, we've seen a cycle of rockets fired on southern Israel and aerial retaliation. Is there another way to operate against Gaza?
I think that both sides, Hamas in Gaza Strip and the State of Israel, both of them really do not want to go into escalation. But sometimes things can go out of control, as we could see this morning. I would need to say that the State of Israel for many years act by results, meaning they can shoot and if nothing happened, then the retaliation is very, in a way, low. But when something happened and we have casualties, then we take measures much more aggressive.
So, for example, the rocket that fired this morning that hit a house with the kids' kindergarten there, if the kids were hurt or killed, then we are in a different scenario this morning.
That's right, that's right. I believe that within 24, maybe 48 hours, everything will calm down, because at the basics, the both sides really don't want to go into escalation.
So the Israeli cabinet met several times over the last few days. Sources inside emphasize the dispute over carrying out a large military operation in Gaza. Where do you stand?
I think that many times in the cabinet, and I have some experience sitting in those meeting rooms, people speaks and they know that at the end of the process, the person who has to take a decision will be more rational and more, in a way, calm, and they need to say what they need to say and they need to take decisions. I belong to those who believe that from the security point of view, it is the Israeli interest to get rid of the Hamas regime in Gaza Strip. This is a strategic decision that should be taken. They didn't take it yet, and therefore all the activities is just to find the new equal for the next round. When they will take the dramatic decisions.
So you're saying more of the same is not working?
That's right. More of the same is more of the same. And I think that we have better situation right now because of what's going in Egypt, because of what's going in Gaza Strip. There is a good chance to get rid of the Hamas regime and in a way try to transfer the area to Abu Mazen. By the UE, without the EU, it depends, but
you said that in 48 hours you think that everything will calm down, so we're not on a bridge of a third intifada, you think?
I think that third intifada is a question of the West Bank. And again, I don't think that in the West Bank, the overall interest of the civilian who lives over there is to go into the third intifada. I think that what we have seen yesterday in Jerusalem and what we are unfortunately still see in Jerusalem today, it's kind of outcome of the open case with the kids that was kidnapped and murdered. And I hope that sooner than later we will find who did it and take care of him.
Nitzan Uriel, thank you so much for coming.
Thank you.
Generations of IDF soldiers have been taught the legacy of the Entebbe rescue operation, which is marking its 38th anniversary, an operation that became a legend in modern military history. Before we introduce our very special guest, let's go back to July 1976.
On June 28, 1976, 2 German terrorists from the Revolutionary Cells Organization and 5 Palestinian members of the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, the PFLP, hijacked an Air France plane on its way from Tel Aviv to Paris. The flight carried 260 passengers and crew. After a brief refueling stop in Benghazi, Libya, the hijackers forced the captain to land at the Entebbe airport, Uganda, near Lake Victoria, more than 3,800 miles from Israel. Then, supported by Ugandan leader Idi Amin, the kidnappers demanded Israel release 52 prisoners, or else the hostages would be executed. As negotiations with the kidnappers continued, Israel began working on the military operation to free the hostages. Military commanders, including the future Chief of Staff Dan Shomron and the future Prime Minister Ehud Barak, together with the Mossad intelligence agency, planned a daring raid on the Entebbe airport. On July 3rd, the Israeli government approved the operation, and 4 Hercules aircraft of the Israel Air Force with combat forces on board took off to Entebbe. The field commander of the operation was Shomron, and his deputy, future Deputy Defense Minister Matan Vilnei. The IDF Elite Special Forces Unit, Sayeret Matkal, was led by Yoni Netanyahu, the brother of the current Israeli Prime Minister, who planned the main part of the operation, the raid on the terminal, and led his forces in Entebbe. The IDF Elite Special Forces alighted from the first C-130 and advanced on the terminal where the hostages were being held. They drove in jeeps and a Mercedes, a copy of Idi Amin's car. On their way to the terminal, 2 Ugandan soldiers confronted them. Netanyahu and another fighter shot them. The fighters then sped to the terminal, got out of their vehicles, and ran to the terminal entrances. Netanyahu was hit as they were opposite the hostage hall and was mortally wounded. His men continued the charge and entered the building, confronting the hostages. The Israeli soldiers killed the 4 terrorists in the hall and 3 more in another part of the building. In the exchange of gunfire, 3 hostages were killed. The mission to take over the terminal was accomplished in just a few minutes, and the soldiers immediately began moving hostages to the waiting planes. Outside the terminal, soldiers of the Sayeret Matkal, commanded by future Defense Minister Shaul Mofaz, continued fighting the Ugandan soldiers. One of these teams, led by current legislator Omer Bar-Lev, destroyed 11 Ugandan fighter planes on the ground, canceling any chance of an aerial pursuit. During the battle for the control of the terminal building and its surroundings, the men of Sayeret Matkal killed 45 Ugandan soldiers. Hostages and soldiers flew back to Israel, where they were greeted with a large and ecstatic reception. Over the years, the Entebbe operation has come to be remembered as one of the boldest military operations in history. Americans see its date, the 4th of July, as symbolic and called it Mission Impossible. The operation's name was changed from Operation Thunderbolt to Operation Jonathan, in memory of Yoni Netanyahu, the slain commander of the IDF Elite Special Forces Unit and the leader of the rescue force.
Joining me now is Reserve Brigadier General Joshua Shiki Shani, the commander of the C-130 wing, which carried the troops in the rescue operation, and who is currently the chief executive of Lockheed Martin Israel. Good evening.
Good evening to you.
So where were you when you got the call that you are going to Uganda?
When we first heard about the hijack, so we kind of made the initial preparation in the squadron. If somebody will approach us, we'll have some good answers. Mm-hmm. So nobody approached at the beginning. But the first time was in a wedding in Haifa, and the chief of the Air Force, the commander of the Israeli Air Force, called me and said, on the way back. First of all, he asked me a few questions, and I did know the answer because I made the preparation in the squadron. And then he said, on the way back, you stop at the headquarters. We will start planning the mission. Mm-hmm.
And then you know you're on that mission.
I wasn't sure at that stage. It's a long process to get the approval, the government approval, the leadership of the armed forces approval. It's not so easy to send 4 airplanes and 200 fighters like 5,000 kilometers. It's a big decision.
So take me into the cockpit, this tense flight. Are there conversations or silence, just preparing yourself to what is going to happen?
It was, first of all, the first stage was critical because we needed to fly very, very low over the Red Sea to avoid the radar detections of one side the Egyptian, the other side the Saudi Arabians. It was Egypt before the peace treaty. And it's not so much we did not violate any aerospace of anybody, but being detected 4 C-130s on Saturday flying south when there are hostages taken, of course it will turn the attention of somebody. Mm-hmm. So we had to avoid them. So we kept full radio silence outside between the airplane, but we talked freely, of course, inside. But when we hit Africa, in Ethiopia area, we hit Africa, then we climbed to a very easy level to flight, and then we opened the radio and we started to talk nonsense, just to get a relief from the tension, just jokes.
Mm-hmm. And training before the operation with the commandos?
We did not do training. We didn't have time. Remember, the whole thing was just a few days. And but we did a rehearsal. We did one rehearsal, which was very basic, to know each other, to meet each other, to make them go up and down from the airplane, but no real training.
You survived the Nazis as a child. This operation made you proud?
It's not exactly survived the Nazis, and I was in Bergen-Belsen as a refugee after the war. And after my father died, I found a letter that he wrote from Bergen-Belsen to friends in Israel. And in this letter, he describes what happened to his family, which was the worst. And then he said, I really don't have any reason to continue living, except the fact that next to me is my baby named Yehoshua, Joshua in Hebrew, and he is the reason for me to be alive. And then, when we returned from Entebbe and we gathered at my home, hundreds of people with pizzas and champagne, and he
showed you how proud they are.
I just looked at him and said to myself, what is he thinking about now?
Mr. Shani, thank you so much for coming.
My pleasure.
That was all we have time for. Be sure to catch us next week for another edition of I-24 News Defense. Have a great night from Jaffa Port.